Hi, everyone, and welcome to Unco, a podcast about what's unusual in tech. I'm your host, Timothy Buck. And today we're going to talk about the HomePod and my smart speaker setup at home, as well as a little bit about the different smart home devices we have around our apartment here in San Francisco. So to start off, just want to thank you guys so much for all of your support over the last week. Had a really positive response to the first two episodes of Unco, and now we're going to get on to a cadence of this week is a solo episode. Next week, there'll be an interview episode, and we're going to go in a cadence like that, back and forth. At least that's the plan for now. I'll let you know if anything changes. So just the other day, the HomePod officially released. I didn't pre-order it or anything, but I did take a walk down to the Apple store near my house and decided to take a look at it. And after playing around with it for a little bit, I decided, I think this is something that I should try. And I think the biggest reason for me personally was because of Apple Music. And I wrote about this over on my site, timothybuck.me. I kind of wrote a post called, "Is the HomePod Right for You?" You should check that out. I go into a lot of detail. But the biggest reason that I decided to buy a HomePod, at least to try out, was because right now it is the only smart speaker that has full native support for Apple Music. And I'm an Apple Music subscriber. I've gone back and forth from Apple Music to Spotify a couple times. I was a huge RDO fan when that was around, RIP RDO. But now I'm an Apple Music subscriber. My wife is as well, and we really do enjoy it. And all the other devices out there, we have Echoes in our house, and they don't work with Apple Music. The Google Homes don't work with Apple Music. And even the Sonos is the closest. You can AirPlay to the Sonos One and to other Sonos devices and play them from your phone, but you can't talk to a smart assistant on Sonos and ask it to play a song. And because of that's what I want. And right now, the HomePod is the only device that allows you to do that. And I think that's one thing that, in all the fair criticisms there are of the HomePod and the frustrations with it, needs to be better and should do more things, and Siri needs to improve. All of those things are true. But Apple's lock-in for Apple Music means that right now, for the 35 million people out there who subscribe to Apple Music, that this is really the only device that offers full native support for them and for their music. And it's not just those 35 million people. It's also the millions and millions of people who have massive iTunes libraries as well. If you're the type of person who hasn't gone all in on streaming music, and there are a lot of people out there who haven't, right now it's 75 million paying for Spotify and 35 million paying for Apple Music. That's 100 million people that are paying for subscription music services, plus all the other small ones combined. There's not really that many. Most of the world isn't paying for that yet. And so if you're one of the massive number of people who has purchased your music on iTunes, right now, the best option for you is the HomePod, because you can, if you have iTunes Match, which is, I forget how much it is. I feel like it's like $20 a year or something, means that you could talk to the HomePod and Siri is going to play whatever music you request. And that is one thing that the HomePod does really, really well. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of podcasts and a lot of discussions about the negatives. Yes, it doesn't do certain things as well as the Echoes that we have in our house. I completely agree. Apple needs to improve that. That's something that they have fallen behind on, and it's really a bummer in that Siri was like the forefront when it was released. It was the best thing around by far, and Amazon and Google and all of its competition nowadays wasn't even around, and Siri was the forefront of that industry, and somehow Apple has allowed themselves to lose their lead, and that's really frustrating as somebody who enjoys Apple products and who wants to support Apple. And as somebody who now owns a HomePod, I do want Siri to improve. That said, for the specific things that I want to use the HomePod for, I have been really happy with it in the few days that I've had it so far. It sounds really, really good, and Siri responds really quickly, hears me even when music is playing, just as good as the echoes we have around our house. Questions about music and playing music and finding songs and playlists and all of that stuff for me is better than the echoes that we have, because the echoes, I don't have Spotify and I don't have Amazon Music, so this is a better experience because all of my playlists that I've built up over the years are in Apple Music or iTunes, and so it can find those and play those, and that's one thing that I really like about the HomePod so far. Other things like the smart home devices. In our house, we have Philips Hue light bulbs. We have 5 of those around the house, just in different rooms. And we also have a handful of plugs that we have around the house, that different lamps that don't use normal light bulbs, like the Hue light bulbs, won't fit in them. So we use those as well. And so we primarily use the echoes around the house and the HomePod to turn on and off those lights. Those have been really great. We're in kind of a San Francisco apartment, so we don't really have that many things that we need to turn into smart devices, but the lights have been really nice. It's just a nice convenience. I guess continue to talk about Siri. I feel like it hears me a lot better than it does on my phone on the HomePod. It doesn't seem to really misunderstand the questions I have. It's still not perfect. There's a lot of things that it can do on the phone that it can't do on the HomePod. Right now, if I speak to my phone, I can have it add to-dos to my to-do app things. It can do all of these other things. It can send messages. It can add things to my calendar. Siri can do a whole lot of things that I don't really use it for that much. But because of one of the big drawbacks of the HomePod, it can't do any of that for me right now. It does have built-in support for some of it, but right now it doesn't have the ability to distinguish between different types of voices like the iPhone has. And so if you have this device in your home and you have a visitor over and you have it set to allow the HomePod to do personal things like sending messages or adding things to your calendar or adding to-dos or reading back previous messages you've had or different things like that, then anybody in your home, a guest, a friend, a roommate, whatever, they can ask Siri to do that, and it's going to do it for whatever account is connected to that HomePod. And because of that, I have that functionality turned off. And that's really a big bummer. It's one thing that Apple definitely needs to improve on this year. Overall, I really have enjoyed the HomePod so far. I think it looks very nice. I think it does music really well. I think for me, it works really well for smart home devices. The sound quality is really, really high. And I think I'm going to try to have a conversation with someone on Unco in the future who is more of an audiophile who really, really knows about these high-end systems and the technology that's used in the HomePod. I know in my article I mentioned that a lot of the audio technology that's in the HomePod has typically been part of $40,000 systems, and now it's in this $350 cylinder that Apple sells. And that's really impressive, but that's kind of outside of my wheelhouse. And so hopefully on future episodes of Unco, I'll bring somebody on who really understands that type of stuff and can give you a more in-depth understanding of why, what's special about it, and how it's different than the competing products you may see from Bose or from Google or other companies who are making some of these really nice speakers. You can keep up with Unco by following us at _UncoFM on Twitter. You can join the community on our website, unco.fm. And, of course, you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever you happen to get your podcasts. And I've also set up a Patreon page to help support the show and keep it around. Any donations would be a huge help to keeping this show going. You can find that over at patreon.com/uncofm. You can also stay up to date with my writing over at timothybuck.me or by following me on Twitter at timothybucksf. Thank you all so much for taking time to listen.